The crisis gripping the Russian Federation has moved beyond the battlefield and into the realm of financial policy and symbolic warfare. The public spectacle surrounding a simple banknote redesign is the perfect, chilling proof that the Kremlin has abandoned governing in favor of managing internal collapse through manufactured chaos. This supposed triviality is in fact a crucial admission of a broken political system. This is FPV Explainer, where we break down the most fascinating stories in drone warfare. If you're enjoying this deep dive, hit the like button, subscribe, and drop a comment telling us what topic you want to see next. Your feedback shapes our future videos and keeps us bringing you clear, detailed analysis from the front lines. The core issue is that the center is now deliberately creating what we call white noise, an emotional, high-involvement distraction designed to divert the public's attention from the systemic failures that truly threaten the regime. Consider the timing. The voting for the 500 ruble note took place precisely when the country was reeling from the real, immediate crises. The economy is struggling under record inflation. The budget is staring into a massive deficit that demands tax hikes, the new NDS and increased tariffs, and the entire military complex is paralyzed by the fuel crisis caused by drone strikes. These are the problems that actually threaten the regime's survival. Instead of addressing these existential economic issues with a coherent plan, the central bank, an institution that claims to be non-political, launched a nationwide symbolic cage fight. This isn't random bureaucratic oversight, it's a cynical maneuver rooted in an old Soviet technology. When you have no good news, create a consuming, emotional, and ultimately meaningless argument. We're witnessing the digital age equivalent of the Monument to Dzerzhinsky debate, a political tool used to absorb national anxiety. The expert consensus confirms this. The primary function of the bank's action was to create a strong, divisive, and easily digestible political narrative that would capture media space. The goal is to keep the citizenry occupied with fighting over whether a skyscraper is more Russian than a mountain. So they are not asking the dangerous, difficult questions. Why is the budget deficit so high? Where did the oil money go? Why are our sons being held illegally on the front line without rotation? This action proves that the highest financial authorities in Russia are functioning not as economic managers, but as political operatives in a desperate attempt to stabilize a failing political situation. They're trading institutional credibility for a short-term public distraction. This is a clear signal to the business and political elites that the leadership has no genuine solution for the economy, resorting instead to theatrics to manage a crisis that is spiraling out of control. This deliberate creation of internal chaos is the most damning indictment of a leadership that has lost the confidence to govern.
We have analyzed the cynical political game of distraction being played by the central bank. But the second, equally corrosive layer of this scandal reveals an act of deliberate ideological subversion, a move that has outraged the Russian military nationalist core and exposed a profound fracture within the regime's own supposed support base. This is not about economics, it is about identity, and the Kremlin's willingness to sacrifice its own foundational myths for political convenience. The specific trigger was the proposal to remove the deeply meaningful and historical Christian symbols from the banknotes, specifically replacing the image of Peter the Great and the Solovetsky Monastery on the 500 ruble note. The official rationale provided by the central bank's representatives that Russia must secularize its currency because it is a multi-confessional and multinational country was instantly interpreted by the conservative pro-war Z community as a direct attack. They see this not as tolerance, but as a deliberate act of de-Christianization and an attempt to erase 1,000 years of Russian history from the nation's most ubiquitous symbol. The outrage among the nationalist and patriotic segments is not an overreaction. It is a profound identity crisis. They view the Russian state as the last bastion of traditional and Orthodox values, and the removal of the cross and the monastery is seen as a betrayal of the very cultural war they believe they are fighting in Ukraine. This manufactured crisis proves that the political leadership is willing to sacrifice the foundational myths that its soldiers are supposedly dying for. This ideological vacuum was immediately filled by the most divisive internal conflict possible, the clash between Chechnya and the Russian heartland. The central bank's process created a perfect trap, forcing a public battle between the symbol of Russian nationalism, Mount Elbrus, and the symbol of the Chechen leader's personal power, the Grozny City skyscrapers. This public spectacle was the intended political chaos. The Z-bloggers were unanimous. The central bank was engaged in a full-scale anti-Russian diversion. By removing the historical symbols and then pitting a secular mountain against a symbol of Chechen autocratic ambition, the highest financial institution in the country deliberately fueled the pre-existing interethnic tensions. They accused the central bank of facilitating a pan-Islamist agenda, arguing that the replacement of Orthodox symbols with neutral landscapes and modern towers was a covert attack on the nation's religious identity. This belief, however extreme, holds immense political power among the very people whose sacrifices sustain the war effort. The result is a devastating loss of political credibility for the central government. The leadership is revealing that it is either too incompetent to stop the financial sector from initiating ideologically explosive conflicts, or that it is deliberately sanctioning these conflicts to distract the population. The ideological rot is complete. When the state removes the symbols that are supposed to unite its people and replaces them with a political squabble, it proves that the regime's focus is on internal survival, not on external victory. This internal disintegration is the single clearest sign that the system is unraveling.
We have analyzed the deliberate ideological provocation by the central bank. That internal chaos was immediately amplified by the direct confrontation at the heart of the Russian periphery, the brutal symbolic fight between the Chechen leader and the Russian nationalist core. This wasn't a mere online argument, it was a visible, system-shaking battle for political dominance that exposed the total collapse of the federal authority. The crux of the scandal lay in the voting for the 500-ruble note. The Chechen leader threw his full weight behind the image of Grozny City skyscrapers. This act was not about urban renewal. It was a political maneuver. It was a brazen, public attempt to solidify Chechnya's unique, privileged status within the Russian Federation, to literally place the symbol of his autocratic power and massive federal subsidies onto the national currency. This immediately ignited the fury of the entire pro-war, nationalist, and veteran community. For them, a Chechen symbol winning was a victory for de-Russification and a profound public humiliation of the Russian military ethos. The conflict instantly escalated beyond symbolism into outright political warfare. The Chechen leader and his administration utilized their full administrative resource, compelling public employees, schools, and universities to vote en masse to engage in transparent vote manipulation. This blatant disregard for the basic rules of the contest was a political demonstration. We can do this because we know we are untouchable. This aggressive use of state power to corrupt a public process confirmed to the nationalist base that the Chechen leader operates with impunity, a direct affront to the rule of law. The political backlash was overwhelming. Z-bloggers and patriotic voices were united in their rage, not just against the Chechen leader, but against the central government that allowed this to happen. The subsequent frantic actions of the central bank were a clear political defeat. When the Chechen leader realized that the exposure of his fraud had rallied the Russian nationalist vote, placing Mount Elbrus in the lead, he switched tactics. He successfully pressured the central bank to cancel the entire voting process and defer the decision. This intervention, resulting in the cancellation of a national public vote, proves that the Chechen leader still wields power over the central bank. a direct public assertion that the political decisions of Grozny trump the institutional authority of Moscow. This conflict is the clearest evidence of structural disintegration. The Chechen leader's ability to force the cancellation of a national vote proves that the central authority is too weak to enforce its own policies and too terrified to directly confront its regional autocrat. This dynamic fuels the deep interethnic resentment among the Russian populace, who see the Chechen leader's wealth and privilege as having been purchased with federal funds and protected by political cowardice. The fight over the 500-ruble note was merely the public arena for a much larger, more dangerous battle for control of the Russian state, a battle that Moscow is currently losing.
We have established the ideological and ethnic flashpoint created by the battle for the banknote. Now, we examine the resulting political fallout, which served as a devastating double knockout. The Chechen leader failed to secure his symbol, and the central bank was forced into a humiliating retreat, proving that the entire system is being governed by fear and political compromise. The Chechen leader's objective was simple: to score a massive, undeniable political victory by forcing the image of the Grozny City skyscrapers onto the national currency. This was meant to be a crowning achievement, a public symbol of Chechnya's unique, dominant status within the Russian Federation, a clear signal to the world and to other regions that his power was absolute. He committed his full administrative apparatus to this task, compelling government employees and institutions to engage in blatant vote manipulation. This aggressive, public fraud was designed to demonstrate his untouchability, proving that the rules of fair process did not apply to him. However, the political knockout was delivered by the central bank. Although the institution has long been accused of being complicit in the regime's political schemes, in this instance, it was forced to uphold a technical facade of integrity. When the national outcry and the evidence of cheating became too overwhelming, the central bank was forced to cancel the entire voting process and defer the decision. This act was a profound public humiliation for the Chechen leader. After committing his entire political capital and organizational power to the goal, he was officially denied the victory. He was unable to successfully push his agenda through the federal mechanism, confirming to all observers that his political influence, while still formidable, is no longer absolute and can be checked. This failure has immediate and dangerous consequences for the entire power structure. The cancellation of the vote proves that the central government is operating in a state of continuous political paralysis. The leadership is so terrified of one domestic pressure group, the angry nationalist Z community, who felt their historical symbols were being erased, that it had to stop another powerful actor, the Chechen leader. This incident is a perfect example of a system where the center is too weak to enforce its own rules and too frightened to commit to a single, stable political decision. The compromise achieved, neither Grozny City nor the nationalists' preferred Elbrus one, was a clear signal of weakness, a failure to govern that is undermining the very authority of the state. The most profound danger of this failure is that the confrontation did not extinguish the conflict. It merely confirmed the deep existing fault lines. The humiliation of the Chechen leader ensures that he will seek to regain his lost honor through a more aggressive, less controllable means. Simultaneously, the event emboldens the nationalist critics, who now see the Chechen leader's perceived political weight as diminished and the federal government as weak. This structural instability, the inability to resolve a symbolic conflict without a total surrender of institutional control, is a clear symptom of a state that is unraveling.
The fight over the 500-ruble note was merely the surface tension for a much larger, more dangerous battle for the future of the Russian Federation.
We have meticulously analyzed the collapse of institutional authority and the public humiliation surrounding the banknote scandal. But the ultimate conclusion of this bizarre saga transcends mere political theater. It confirms a terrifying diagnosis. The Russian system is structurally disintegrating, and the conflict over the 500-ruble note is the perfect metaphor for the loss of central control. The final verdict on this internal struggle is clear. The incident proves that the greatest long-term threat to the Russian Federation is not Ukraine or NATO, but its own deep-seated, unresolved contradictions. The crisis stems from the leader's failure to establish the rule of law, choosing instead to manage volatile regions through personal loyalty and massive financial subsidies. The battle between Grozny City and Elbrus exposed two major unresolvable fault lines that threatened to accelerate the state's breakup. First, the failure of central authority. The Kremlin demonstrated a profound political paralysis. It was incapable of either enforcing its will, by making the Chechen leader accept the loss of the vote, or maintaining stability by allowing the corrupt voting to stand. The only solution was a compromise, the cancellation of the vote, which serves as a massive signal of weakness. This act proves that the central government cannot resolve conflicts without sacrificing its own institutional credibility. The very symbol of the nation's financial integrity, its currency, was held hostage by a regional strongman and a group of domestic political agitators. Second, the ideological and ethnic fire. The confrontation was not just about money, it was a visible clash between two irreconcilable political forces, the Russian nationalist Orthodox core and the autocratic privileged Chechen power structure. The anger of the Z-bloggers, who saw the contest as a battle against the de-Christianization of the currency, reveals the deep ideological resentment over Chechnya's unique, highly subsidized status. This ideological fracture, now openly acknowledged and amplified by the center's weak response, is a ticking time bomb. The moment the central government's control fully collapses, whether due to military failure in Ukraine or the Chechen leader's ill health, this political tension will instantly translate into large-scale internal violence and conflict between regions. The final danger is that the military and financial resources needed to sustain the war are now being diverted to manage this internal rot. The political paralysis prevents the leadership from making the necessary choices to stabilize the country, whether that is calling for a massive mobilization or fully restructuring the war economy. The system is consuming itself. The energy spent on a banknote dispute is energy that is not being spent on solving the massive budget deficits, the crippling fuel crisis, and the loss of its most experienced soldiers. The structural disintegration of the Federation is the single most important consequence of the leader's rule. He has built a system so fragile, so reliant on the strength of a single person, that a minor bureaucratic dispute can escalate into a full-scale crisis of political legitimacy. The collapse is not just imminent, it is already underway, manifesting in the public humiliation of the central bank and the open defiance of its regional proxies.